The contract was 6 pages long. Ryan Calloway had read it 3 times before signing it. Not because the language was, complicated, but because he kept stopping at the same line on page 4. The parties agreed to conduct themselves in all public settings as a genuinely married couple for a period not to exceed 12 months. And thinking about how strange it was that genuine could be the agreed upon word in a document that was, by its entire nature, the opposite of genuine. He signed it anyway. He signed it because his grandmother was dying. Margaret Calloway was 81 years old, and she had built the Calloway family's real estate holdings from a single apartment building in Portland, Oregon that she and her late husband, Harold, had purchased in 1968 with borrowed money and 40 years of work into a portfolio that was currently valued at somewhere north of $300 million. She was sharp and she was loving, and she was, in the specific way of certain matriarchs, completely immovable on the subject of family. She had told Ryan's father in no uncertain terms when he was 30 that she would not pass the business to an unmarried man, because an unmarried man had no stake in the future, and his father had married Ryan's mother within the year. She had told Ryan's older brother the same thing at 30, and his brother had married his college girlfriend, and they now had 3 children in a house in the Portland Hills and were, by all appearances, genuinely happy. Ryan was 32. He had not managed to fall in love with anyone, not for lack of trying, but for lack of finding someone he could imagine building a life alongside, which was a distinction that mattered to him even if it had cost him time. Margaret was sick. The doctors had said 6 months, possibly less. And Margaret had said, in the particular way she said things that were not negotiable, that she wanted to see Ryan married before she went. This was how he had ended up across a conference table from Lily Morgan. Lily was 29. She was an events coordinator at a company in Portland that organized corporate functions and private celebrations, and she was good at her job in the specific way of people who understand that the difference between an ordinary event and a memorable one is attention to every detail that most people overlook. She had dark auburn hair that fell past her shoulders and green eyes that were quick and observant, and she had the kind of face that became more interesting the longer you looked at it, not conventionally beautiful in the way that lands immediately, but beautiful in the way that stays. She was 5'4", and she moved through a room with the deliberate, efficient grace of someone who always knew where everything was. She needed money, not in the desperate way, but in the way of someone who has made a plan and needs the resources to execute it. Her younger sister, Cassie, had been accepted to a graduate program in environmental science at the University of Washington, and Cassie's scholarship covered 70% of the cost.
And the other 30%?
Was a number that Lily had been looking at for months without finding a path to it that didn't require doing something drastic. Their mother was in Bend, Oregon, working 2 jobs since their father had passed 4 years ago, and Lily had spent those 4 years being the person who held the practical pieces of the family together while also building her own life. And she was tired, not from the caring but from the constant arithmetic of it. Ryan's attorney had approached her through a mutual contact. The arrangement was presented with clinical precision. 12 months, $140,000 paid in installments, a non-disclosure agreement that was ironclad, the expectation of attendance at family functions and public outings, sufficient to convince a loving but perceptive 81-year-old woman that her grandson had found someone real. At the end of 12 months, or upon Margaret's passing, and whichever came first, the marriage would be quietly dissolved on the grounds of irreconcilable differences, and they would each return to their separate lives with no further obligation to each other. Lily had read the contract twice, asked 3 clarifying questions, and signed it. They were married on a Saturday in September, at the Calloway family home in the West Hills of Portland, a house with a view of the Willamette Valley that on clear days extended all the way to Mount Hood. Margaret sat in a chair on the terrace and wore a blue dress and cried in the way of old women who have loved long enough to recognize something real, which was the detail that settled in Lily's chest with an uncomfortable weight during the ceremony, because Margaret was not seeing something real. She was seeing something performed, and the performance was being aimed directly at her heart. Ryan had told her, in their first of several planning meetings before the wedding, to simply be herself. Don't perform, he had said. My grandmother will see through performance. Just be a person, which she had found somewhat absurd, given the fundamental nature of the situation, but which she had taken as practical advice anyway. The reception was small, 30 people, immediate family and close friends, and Lily had organized it herself because organizing things was what she knew how to do and because having a task kept her from feeling the full weight of what she was doing in the room where she was doing it. She had selected the flowers and arranged the seating and chosen the music and curated the menu with the same attention she brought to every event she organized professionally, and at some point during the evening, Ryan had appeared beside her during a quiet moment and said, You didn't have to do all of this. I did, actually, she said. It needs to look right. He had looked at her for a moment. It looks better than right, he said, and there was something in how he said it that was not about the party, and she had looked away because she did not know what to do with it. They lived in Ryan's house in the Irvington neighborhood of Portland, a craftsman house with a front porch and a garden that had been somewhat neglected before Lily arrived, and that she began incrementally improving, not as any part of the arrangement, but simply because she could not look at unhappy plants without intervening. Ryan noticed this after the third week and said nothing about it. But she came home one afternoon to find that he had bought 2 new planters and left them on the porch steps without comment, and she had filled them and placed them on either side of the front door, and the house looked noticeably better, and they did not discuss it. The logistics of sharing a house with a stranger were strange in ways she had not fully anticipated. Not uncomfortable, precisely. Ryan was considerate in the practical sense, the kind of person who replaced things when they ran out and cleaned the kitchen with the same thoroughness he apparently brought to everything, and who left a light on when he knew she was coming home after dark, but strange in the way of being suddenly and completely proximate to someone's daily life, without the history of accumulation that normally makes 2 people's habits intelligible to each other. She learned his coffee preferences in the first week. He learned she read in the mornings and did not speak until the 2nd cup. She learned he worked late on Tuesdays and early on Fridays. He learned she cooked when she was stressed, and that stressed cooking produced remarkable food. She learned that he had a habit of sitting on the back porch in the evenings regardless of the weather, and that on those evenings he usually had something on his mind that he was not ready to talk about. He learned that she could tell the difference between his professional stress and his personal stress, which she was not sure he knew himself. Margaret came to dinner at the house 3 times in the first 2 months. She moved carefully now with a cane, and she sat at the kitchen table and talked to both of them with the ease of a woman who had spent her life reading people and found these 2 people worth reading. She asked Lily about her work and listened to the answers with genuine interest. She asked Ryan about his projects and pushed back on his assessments with the precision of someone who understood real estate at a molecular level, and she looked sometimes between the 2 of them when they were not paying attention to being looked at, with the expression of someone confirming something she had already decided. The 3rd dinner in November, she pulled Lily aside while Ryan was in the kitchen. She took Lily's hand in both of hers, which were thin and very warm, and she said, I wasn't sure. When he first told me about you, I was afraid he had done something hasty. She paused. But the way he is with you, there's a steadiness in him that wasn't there before. I can see it. She pressed Lily's hand once. Thank you for being someone worth that steadiness. Lily smiled. She nodded. She held Margaret's gaze with everything she had and did not let what she was feeling reach her face. She went home that evening and told Ryan what his grandmother had said, and he went quiet in the way she had learned to recognize, not evasive, but interior, sitting with something. Then he said, She's usually right about things, and Lily said, I know, and did not elaborate, and they sat in the kitchen for a while longer than was necessary, without anyone suggesting they should go to bed. December arrived, and with it the particular quality of Portland winter, gray and damp. the city softened by low cloud and the smell of rain on evergreens, and they had developed by now the specific rhythms of two people who have been sharing space long enough that the sharing has become natural. They cooked together on Sunday evenings. Not by plan, but by accumulation, the habit having arrived without announcement. They had begun gradually and without discussing it, to tell each other things and not performed intimacy for any external purpose, but the actual unremarkable things that accumulate between people in proximity, the small observations and minor frustrations and incidental memories that constitute the texture of a life. She told him about her father one evening, standing at the kitchen counter while the pasta water came to a boil, in the offhand way that the most important things sometimes arrive, sideways, without build-up, as though they had simply been waiting for a moment that was not trying too hard. She told him her father had been a high school history teacher who had made every significant family decision by asking the question, will we be glad we did this in 20 years? And that she still used this question, privately and often, and that it had become the primary way she knew something mattered to her. Ryan had been quiet for a long time after she said this. Then he had said, I've been making decisions by asking what's practical for so long that I've stopped asking what's real. He said it to the counter, not to her, in the way of someone saying something out loud they had not previously said. She did not respond immediately, because she understood it was not a request for a response. She added the pasta and they ate dinner, and the thing he had said sat between them like something that had been placed on the table and would have to be acknowledged eventually. Margaret's decline accelerated in January. The doctors adjusted their estimate downward. Ryan spent more time at her house, coming home late, quieter than usual, and Lily found herself doing the things that people do for someone carrying grief, leaving food out when he came home, sitting in the same room without requiring conversation, being present without making the presence about herself. She had not been asked to do these things. They were not in the contract. She did them because he was sad and she was there, and it was the only thing that was true. One evening in late January, he came home at 10 o'clock, and she was sitting on the back porch with a blanket and a book she was not reading, and he came out and sat in the other chair. And after a long time he said, she asked me today if I was happy. What did you say? Lily asked. I said yes, a pause, and it wasn't a performance. She did not say anything. The Portland rain was soft on the roof of the porch, and the garden she had been tending for 4 months was dark and quiet and waiting for spring. Lily, he said. I know, she said. Do you? She turned and looked at him. He was looking at her with the specific expression of someone who has been careful for a very long time and has decided to stop. She thought about the contract on page 4. She thought about, will we be glad we did this in 20 years? She thought about Margaret's hands, thin and very warm, pressing hers. What happens, she said carefully, at the end of 12 months? I've been thinking about that, he said. And? I keep arriving at the same conclusion, he said, which is that the answer I want requires something I haven't asked you yet. She waited. Do you want to stay? He said. Not the contract. Not the arrangement. I mean, do you want to stay? The rain came down. She thought about Cassie, who had started her graduate program in January, whose tuition was paid, who had called Lily the week before to say she was thriving, and to ask if Lily was okay, which Cassie asked because she knew Lily better than anyone and had a radar for the specific kind of okay that was not okay. She thought about the Sunday evening dinners and the planters on the porch steps and the coffee she made the way he liked it without thinking about it, and the book she was not reading on the back porch because she was waiting for him to come home. Yes, she said, simply and without qualification. I want to stay. He reached across the space between the chairs and took her hand and held it, and they sat on the back porch of the house in Irvington in the Portland January rain. And it was not a performance for anyone. Margaret passed in February on a Thursday morning with Ryan at her side. She went peacefully, which was the word the doctors used and which Ryan told. Lily later was accurate. She had been calm, and the last thing she had said was Harold's name, which was her husband who had been gone for 15 years, and which suggested that wherever she was going she had someone waiting. The funeral was attended by everyone who had ever been. shaped by Margaret Calloway's particular combination of love and rigor, which was a significant number of people. Lily stood beside Ryan through the service, and the burial and the long afternoon at the family home afterward, and she did not perform anything. She was simply there, beside him, the way a person stands beside someone they have chosen. That evening, back at the house, Ryan sat at the kitchen table, and Lily made tea and sat across from him, and they were quiet for a long time. And then he said, "She knew." Lily looked at him. "The last time I visited her alone," he said. "She asked me when it had changed." He looked at the table. "I asked her what she meant. She said, I could see from the beginning that you had made some kind of arrangement. I'm not a fool, Ryan, but I could also see the moment when it stopped being an arrangement. And you didn't know it yet." He paused.
She said the planter by the front door was when she knew it was real.
Lily was quiet for a long moment. "The planters," she said. "Apparently." She looked at him across the kitchen table and thought about an 81-year-old woman in a blue dress crying at a wedding she knew was not entirely real, waiting with the patience of someone who had loved long enough to know that real things arrive on their own schedule and in their own form, and that the best thing you can do is make a little room for them and trust the process. She was right about things, Lily said. She was always right about things, Ryan said. He reached across the table and she met him halfway, and outside the Portland winter was beginning its slow concession to spring. The first tentative green appearing at the edges of the garden she had planted, in a house she had arrived at as a stranger, and the February rain was the same as the January rain and the same as the September rain, but everything else was entirely different, which was the way real things worked, arriving gradually and all at once. Impossible to point to the exact moment, but impossible to miss once they had settled into the permanent shape of something you were going to carry for the rest of your life. She called Cassie the next morning. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I know," Cassie said, because Cassie always knew. "It got real," Lily said. A pause. Then Cassie laughed, warm and full, the laugh of a little sister who has been waiting for her older sister to admit something the whole family could see. "I know that too," she said. Lily looked out the kitchen window at the garden coming in the planters by the front door and the porch, where two people had sat in the rain and said true things, and she thought about all the ways a life arrives at itself, sideways, without build-up, dressed as something else entirely until the moment it isn't, and she thought that her father would have liked Ryan, which was the thing she had been unwilling to think for months because it was the thing that would make it true. It was true. She was glad. She was going to be glad for 20 years.